Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Charlotte Post Foundation, I would like to welcome you to our virtual webinar on Understanding ADHD Beyond the Myths webinar, brought to you by the Charlotte Post Foundation, and would like to thank Bank of America for being a sponsor for this event. My name is Linda Johnson. I will be your host this evening. It is a pleasure to have each and every one of you joining us from various locations, right from the comfort of your own home or offices. Thank you for making the time to be with us today. As we kick off today's session, I'd like to remind everyone of the power of learning and connecting even in a digital platform. Our webinar today promised to be both informative and enlightening. So write down any questions or concerns you may have, and don't be afraid to ask our panel of experts for further clarification. Tonight, we're coming live with a webinar, Understanding ADHD Beyond the Myths. We like to bring awareness this evening to educate the community on the neurological conditions known as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Its purpose is to dispel the myths surrounding ADHD, as well as address the culture and social stigmas that prevent individuals from seeking necessary evaluation and treatment. This is a safe space for this conversation this evening, and we thank you. We do have a webinar disclaimer. And we'd like to share an important disclaimer. The information presented in this webinar, including any videos played and opinions expressed by speakers, is intended for general informational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by speakers during this webinar are those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Charlotte Post Foundation or any of our affiliates. The sharing of any content does not imply endorsement by the Charlotte Post Foundation. Please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and may be shared publicly by the Charlotte Post Foundation at a later date. Your participation in this webinar indicates your consent to this recording and any future use of the webinar content by the Charlotte Post Foundation. We encourage all participants to exercise their own judgment and conduct their own research before making any decisions based on the information shared in this webinar. The Charlotte Post Foundation assumes no responsibility for errors or omission in the contents of this webinar. Thank you for your attention to this disclaimer, and we hope you find the webinar informative and engaging. So tonight we have with us Gerald Johnson, the president of the Charlotte Post Foundation. On panelists, we have Dr. Brugman, ADHD specialist. He will be our presenter this evening. Along with him, we have Gilda Easton, Senior Vice President of Bank of America, and she will be our interviewer. The Charlotte Post Foundation is glad to say this event here this evening is sponsored by Bank of America. We thank you for being a sponsor, for bringing this information to our community, our audience. And that's the time I'd like to invite Gerald Johnson, president of the Charlotte Post, to our podium to share a little bit of information about who we are and what the Charlotte Post programs are. Gerald?
Thank you, Linda. You disappeared on us, but other than that, I'm ready to move on. Here we got the Charlotte Post Foundation is proud of our educational initiatives that we carry out on a regular basis. Our number one program is corrective education, where we have an after-school program and several Title I elementary schools in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system. Community education, what you're participating in tonight, is bringing you information that'll make you aware of circumstances that are taking place in our community that are affecting people in a way that we need to talk about it, because in this case tonight, with this particular topic, a lot of complexities are involved, and the myth of this whole thing is something that we all need to understand and appreciate and help make this initiative move forward in a positive manner. And you will hear some good information about all of that from our interviewer, Gilda Easton, and our doctor, Dr. Richard Derek Brugman. And our continuing education program is about highlighting the achievements of African American students that participate in our top senior program, that are doing outstanding work in high school, that we just want to celebrate them in terms of taking education seriously, as well as issue scholarships to seniors, the top seniors that a panel of judges select as being the two top seniors of the list of students that we are highlighting as candidates of this program. So other than that, I have nothing else to say. I'm interested in getting this program started and getting this information to all of us. And with no further ado, let's roll.
Okay. Gerald, we said before we get started here, there's a few things we like to go over as far as our webinar etiquette. As we know, in this virtual space, things happen, we disappear, mutes, what have you. So if by chance you lose contact with us, we ask you to sign off and come back. We will continue the conversation and we won't miss a beat. So just come back. We'll be there waiting for you. We will have a Q&A during the presentation. And so this is where your questions will be addressed. And by being an active participant in this conversation, you're helping to raise awareness. So the chat will be for our use, our team to communicate. And so we ask that you put your questions in the Q&A section there. You'll see it on your panel there. There's also another way we'll take questions this evening. If you're interested, you can raise your hand and we'll take your call, your question live, and just be mindful, respectful of time so we can get to many questions as we can. And we say thank you. And so at this time here, I'd like to bring our interviewer, Gilda Easton, to the podium. At this time, Gilda, I'll be turning it over to you.
Great. And thank you, Linda. Certainly appreciate that introduction. And thank you much to the Charlotte Post Foundation for hosting this event and to Bank of America for sponsoring the event. As you mentioned, this topic is quite a complex one, and it's one that's wrapped in a lot of myths and misunderstandings and can impact people in significant ways. And so we wanted to bring this particular topic to the community to raise awareness, help people to better understand what ADHD is, what it isn't, and also how to be supportive of loved ones or yourself if you happen to be someone with that condition. Wanted to share that here we really want to raise awareness around ADHD. As I mentioned, there are several folks who do have ADHD, and it often gets dismissed. It is certainly misunderstood and can in many cases become the butt of the jokes. However, for someone who is impacted by ADHD, it's not a joke at all. And it is something that we all need to better understand, especially because of the stigma that can sometimes be accompanying with ADHD. We want to dispel that as well so that everyone, whether they are neurotypical or neurodiverse, can display their authentic selves and see this as a safe place for us to have that discussion. So I'm very, very excited for this discussion, especially because of our guest. We have with us Dr. Derek Brugman. He is a specialist in the treatment of ADHD. Because he himself has ADHD and dyslexia, he is more than qualified to speak to the topic, and he has been treating it for over 25 years. In fact, because he is so passionate about ADHD and making sure folks are educated around it, he has been recognized as the ADHD doctor. So with that said, Dr. Brugman, I want to say welcome and thank you for coming and being a part of tonight's discussion.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're just going to jump right on in. As Gerald said, let it roll. So we're going to let it roll. So first on my list of questions is basic and foundational. Can you tell us what is ADHD?
Well, ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder, probably the most common disorder that is diagnosed in childhood. And it's real. Now, the name attention deficit, ADHD, hyperactivity disorder, I think is a little bit of a misnomer. We don't have a attention deficit. I think we have almost too much attention. It's more of an attention dysregulation disorder, but it's actually based upon an actual neurochemical difference in the brains of those of us with ADHD. MRIs and studies actually show there is a difference in the ADHD brain versus the non-ADHD brain. That is definitely measurable and seen. The prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain, is the executive center. That's where we decide what stimuli in our environment do we pay attention to, what do we ignore, what impulses do we respond to, what impulses do we block. It's where working memory is. And those things are all vital in our day-to-day organization. Now, that part of the brain is activated by neurochemicals called dopamine and norepinephrine and others, but in ADHD particularly, it's a lack of transfer of dopamine and norepinephrine neuron to neuron in that part of the brain that causes this. The way I like to think of it is I like to think in terms of pictures. So a neurotypical person without ADHD, it's like they have a pilot light on in that part of the brain all the time. That dopamine transfers normally, neuron to neuron. They can focus whenever they decide to. They can check those impulses whenever they want to. Those of us with ADHD have a unique ability. We can actually turn that pilot light on brighter than other people. We can hyper focus, and that's what fools people. But what our normal isn't on. People without ADHD, it's that pilot light is just on all the time. People with ADHD, that pilot light's normal is off. And we have to, physical energy, we have to try to keep the pilot on. We can do it, but the problem is we have to, as soon as we stop trying, oh, I got this, and you think about other things, the pilot starts going out. And that's why we get this, we do great, then we do bad. We do great, then we do bad. It's on, off, on, off. And it's often why people with ADHD are exhausted by the end of the day, because to try to keep that focus, it requires energy. And I actually do remember my dad saying to me when I was younger, why are you tired after school? All you have to do is sit there and pay attention. Those of us with ADHD have to put more energy into sitting still and paying attention than we do if we were running around playing soccer all day long. And so it's an exhausting endeavor.
So I appreciate you saying that, Dr. Brugman, because it kind of leads me into other questions, and that being, ADHD is sometimes described as the unseen disability. So you were talking about how you're able to have that pilot light on and it shines brighter than anybody else when you are hyper focused. And so that then leads the external world to say, oh, they're fine. They don't have ADHD. Right. Nothing's wrong. They can focus on X, Y, or Z. And so it then marginalizes the impact of ADHD in the life of the person who actually has it. So with those things in mind, can you help us understand why it is so often dismissed or misdiagnosed?
Well, and I think you hit it on the head right there. Is the major reason why it's missed a lot is that there's no physical attributes that makes it obvious that someone has it or doesn't have it. It's internal. It's um, not a physical disability. But because we can, it's really a dysregulation. One of the myths of ADHD is that we can't focus. It's just not true. People with ADHD can hyper focus. And I always say, now, again, I'm a little biased because I have ADHD. So I always say our brains are better, not worse. We just have to learn how to use them. And in our niche, we do better than others. But when people see that, look how well they can focus at that, then they assume that you could do that all the time. Or that when that pilot light goes out, we're not in control of that pilot light. When it goes out and we can't focus, people think you're doing that on purpose, or you're just not trying enough. And so that's the issue. The fact that we could do so well 1 minute and not the next makes it confusing for others, and think, well, why don't you just keep doing that all the time? And it makes it very difficult to be missed.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it is that ADHD, the classic ADHD, there's 3 types of ADHD. There's inattentive type, combined type, we have a little bit of everything, and hyper impulsive type. So hyperimpulsivity is being overactive. Impulsivity is acting without thinking. It's not bad behavior on purpose. It's acting without thinking. And then inattentiveness isn't really inattentiveness per se, but it's basically being inattentive at a particular thing at a particular time. The people that are more inattentive type ADHD, they're not drawing attention to themselves, so they get missed. Got more girls with or just type ADHD. The boys that are more hyper impulsive, that's a little bit more visible. And so people think that, well, that's ADHD. Everybody is like that. And so the people that are more inattentive or distracted get missed because they're not running around the room. They're not, blurting out or drawing attention to themselves. So they tend to get missed, or they get labeled as just daydreamers or lazy. And that's very often not even close to true.
That's true. I appreciate that. So, because you hit on a couple of things in your answer, you mentioned girls or women, boys or men. One of the other thoughts out there is that you outgrow ADHD. Can you speak to that about how it is and how it carries through throughout the lifetime and not just at childhood?
Yeah, it is a lifetime, issue. I tell people you're born with ADHD, you die with ADHD. Now it does change over time, and so does our environment and our abilities. And so so ADHD does. You don't outgrow it; it changes. But even like you said, that it's often misunderstood. Even doctors don't understand it very well, teachers, etc., because this isn't taught in medical school. There's a lot of things that physicians have to learn outside of what they were taught in the past. It's ongoing education, which is what you guys are about too, ongoing education. So very often the old thinking was that, oh yeah, look, little Johnny there who's jumping around the room and grabbing things, when he turned 14, he's not doing that anymore. Look, he outgrew it. That impulsivity isn't gone. It's just changed. You learn to not grab things out of people's hands. You might learn to not, blurt out or wait for your thing, but it just changes. Later on in life, impulsivity might be finishing people's sentences, blurting out. People don't see that as ADHD anymore. They just see that as you're being rude. You're not being considerate of other people. You're just, someone that I don't want to be around. And so it changes enough where people don't recognize it. And that's part of the problem.
Wow. That great answer there and an explanation. Because, a lot of times when we think of ADHD, there's always a negative perception and always a negative connotation of how we speak to it. But people with ADHD, one of the things that I hope that our listeners will take away from this is it is not about IQ. It's not about ability. It is a different brain chemistry and how you process the outside influences that are coming into your brain. So if you could just take a little bit of time and talk to us about some of the positives that we see from those who have ADHD. You know, folks would say that ADHD is bad, folks are lazy, so on and so forth, and, you know, low IQ. We'll tell that to Albert Einstein. You know, the theory
Exactly
is
right.
that he had ADHD. So if you could just give us a few of the positives as well, because I wanted to show a balance here, that it's not everything is negative, but that there are also some good things that are the unique abilities of an ADHD mind.
And I again admit that I'm a little biased because I have it, but I firmly believe that there are some abilities that could be almost superpowers if we learn to use them correctly. And people don't realize that one of the things I have in my office is a poster of a lot of very famous people that have ADHD. People don't realize a lot of the best have ADHD, but people just don't talk about it because of those negative connotations. But people now, in my experience, and I've seen thousands of people now over the 25 years, I would tell you that my general impression is that most people with ADHD have higher IQs, not lower. Now, the problem is that because the ADHD are distracted, often don't utilize their gifts well enough. And so it's so, you know, especially like in a classroom setting. So it you know, but they're often very bright. The you know, some of the entrepreneurs, people with ADHD, I always think we see more, not less. We think more. We're creative. We think outside the box. Those are all good things, not bad things. It's just that if you're thinking outside of the box when the teacher wants you to be in the box, that's a problem. You know, a lot of the creativity in the workplace, people with ADHD do great there. But now when they have to sit down and document everything and do the boring part, that's when they fall off the you know, the
off the rails.
Off the rails, yeah, and get in trouble. The creators in society, the inventors, the entrepreneurs, very often they have ADHD. You mentioned Einstein, ADHD. He failed. He got kicked out of college. Partly because, you know, he spoke when he shouldn't and, you know, would tell people that he was smarter than them. And teachers don't like that. So, but, you know, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, or just a few of the others that even Elon Musk has ADHD. When they're in their niche, we could do phenomenal things. But all of those people did terrible in a college setting because that's when they're supposed to do what other people want them to do. And that's hard. But when they're studying or doing what they enjoy, they could do phenomenally better.
Well, that's great.
And creativity
explaining
is always, I think, just a great thing with ADHD.
Well, I appreciate you explaining that because it can be like putting a square peg in a round hole. And, you know, that's why folks get mislabeled quite often is because they're being asked to do something that would be that round hole and
Exactly
they are
right.
the square peg. So, you know, kind of continuing on that vein, can you tell us a couple of the prevailing myths that you see and hear and how you address them to dispel those myths?
Yeah, and one common one is everybody has ADHD, and it's therefore it's not really real. And it's true that everybody gets distracted. Everybody can forget things. Everybody can be impulsive at times, but with ADHD, it's a brain chemistry issue, and one that we're not always in control in. We can exercise control, but it requires so much effort to do that. It's very, very difficult to maintain it. You know, so it's on and off. But that's really one of the big ones is just that it's, you know, everybody has it. That's just not true. And that's like saying because, you know, everybody I know that has cancer drank water at one point, therefore water causes cancer. You know, or I've seen people before that because somebody flaps their hands, that means they must have autism. That's just not true. You know, so that's a big one. It is a real thing, and it's not everybody doesn't have a little bit of ADHD. You know, another big one is people with ADHD are lazy. That again is just not true. Now, can somebody with ADHD be lazy? Yes. And sometimes when a parent is asking me for, oh, I need a different medicine because Johnny doesn't want to do homework. Well, I have to do a little investigation. There's no medicine that makes somebody want to do their homework, So, but if they were avoiding it because they can't sit still and focus and it's so frustrating, well, the right medicine can open a door where they can, hey, I can do this. I can sit here and get this done. But it doesn't make them want to. They can still decide not to. So it doesn't, there's, that's not true either. ADHD is overdiagnosed. I would say it's both over and mostly underdiagnosed. There is sometimes when ADHD gets into the news or whatever, then suddenly everybody is diagnosed with ADHD. There's a tendency to think every problem at school must be ADHD and therefore everybody's got ADHD. But that's, again, if you really look into it, I tell people all the time they don't have ADHD. It's something else. So it's actual true diagnosis isn't overdiagnosed. In fact, it's probably underdiagnosed. But I think the throwing that label around it's easy to do, and just say, oh, that's ADHD, and that's not true either. So that's a common thing. But I think that in reality, about 10% of the population has it. 1 in 10, and that's a lot. Now, I like to say, again, I always say my personal bias is I have ADHD. There's nothing that's in 10% of the population that's not there for a reason. God doesn't make big mistakes. So there's reasons that, situations where ADHD can be an advantage. Now, in today's day and age where everything is sit still for 20 years in a classroom and look at a computer screen, that's not an environment that people with ADHD excel in. So it's not that there's more ADHD now, it's just that our environments are changed. I like to use like now, I can't say Daniel Boone, David Crockett, real people in history. I can't say for sure I know they have ADHD, but I'm telling you, they had ADHD. They weren't sitting in a classroom. They weren't, churning butter. They were out exploring. The explorers, the people that opened up the country, the people that discovered new things. Those are ADHD people in their environment where they shine. You take those same individual and make them today sit still and look at a computer screen for 8 hours a day. They're not going to do so well.
You had mentioned about that in the students being in school and you can't make them want to do a particular thing. No medication is going to change that. But sometimes what we see in in marginalized communities, especially African American or Hispanic Latino, two things occur. One, parents are afraid for their children to be diagnosed with ADHD because they think they're going to be labeled and it's a stigma that's placed on the child. They think they're going to be put into all of these set aside groups because they are slow learners. And, all of those things are just complete misconceptions as well. And then, children who may blurt out or may have jiggly legs sometimes are told you need to be still and stop doing X, Y, Z. And so they're seen as bad students rather than looking at some of these very typical behaviors of someone who might have ADHD. So, just kind of thinking about that from those perspectives. How have you helped people who have had the challenges, and what would you say to them when they are trying to seek treatment or have gotten diagnosed but are afraid to tell a soul?
Yeah. And along the same lines, like another myth is that ADHD is from bad parenting. And again, that's just not true. But that's sometimes another reason why a parent might not want to seek treatment because they're afraid that they'll get labeled as a bad parent. And again, it's not about that. That is a particular challenge. Now in terms of I understand the fear of labels because they don't always bring good things, but one way I look at that is that, well, if ADHD is there and causing issues, and particularly if it's hyper impulsive and the kids are getting in trouble, they're going to get a label one way or the other. And which label do you want, ADHD or that bad kid? Or again, even if they're not impulsive, they're just daydreaming, that lazy person, that person that just doesn't work harder. They could do better, but they just don't. They're lazy. They're going to get that label anyway, unfortunately, because teachers are humans too, and that's what people do. And I often tell people, if we do, diagnose and treat ADHD, it's not that you have to tell anybody about it either. You don't have to tell the teacher. But if we treat it correctly, we can unlock the potential that person has, and basically open a door that's closed. And that's kind of the key there is that if, being diagnosed with ADHD, if you're worried about labels, you don't have to necessarily tell people that you have it. But in a school situation, if the label helps you to get, say, extra testing time or things like that, that could be an advantage. But it should not in any way put you in a disadvantage. Now, there still are even teachers that don't believe in ADHD, and that's the trouble. Now, I think some minority communities in the Black community, the same, like impulsive behavior, and one person might be say, oh, that person's maybe impulsive, maybe we can get some medicine and help them, and another person might be just labeled, oh, that's just a bad kid. And again, then they don't seek treatment.
Yeah.
And I think that's wrong. We don't want to see that happen, because if it is impulsive behavior, impulsivity really it's literally acting without thinking. When people say, well, that child just needs to learn to think before they act. Well, that's the whole problem with ADHD. We're not thinking, we're acting, and we don't think until afterwards, and then it's too late. And afterwards we can say, oh yeah, I know I shouldn't have done that, but in the moment I wasn't thinking. And so there's no way to get that person to think before they act if they're impulsive. And punishing after they act doesn't do anything.
Right.
Punishment is supposed to make people think before they act. Well, with ADHD, that's the whole problem. We don't think before we act. So punishment just causes problems, and then makes people, try to avoid. How do you get out of punishment? That develops other bad habits. Lying
and other trauma as well.
Yeah. Exactly right.
As you were mentioning all of this, and excuse me, I've got a tickle in my throat all of a sudden, but it leads me to the question of concerns on medication. That is one of those things that I, as a parent, had struggled with in terms of medication, and what would be the long-term prognosis. Is this something that they need forever? Can they quit after high school, going on into college? So can you speak to the efficacy of medication in both children and adults? And, one other thing I'm going to throw in here. When we first started hearing more about ADHD, as you gave that example of a boy running around, completely off the chain in a classroom, we heard a lot about Ritalin, and we heard a lot about medicating the children. And so I think using medication to assist someone with ADHD as part of their treatment definitely took on a bad rap.
Yeah.
And hence folks are now afraid of any types of medication. So if you could just speak to that a little, I would appreciate it.
And a lot of times the people that were identified as ADHD and put on Ritalin and Adderall, those are now parents of kids. And back then there wasn't a good understanding of the medications. I would say a lot of times they were overused or not used correctly. And so some bad experiences that people really did have were because they weren't used correctly. So I get a lot of times it's dads that will say, well, I don't want my child on that medicine because I was on it and it made me a zombie. Or I saw my friends' kids were zombies on it. And what I would say right off the bat, that means that person either one didn't have ADHD, didn't need that medicine, or two, it was too much, not the right dose. The good news is now over the decades, we've developed a lot of I wouldn't say they're new medicines because there's the roots are still the same, but better delivery systems, longer acting, less side effects, smoother on, smoother off, to where we can really address those things. But anytime, and that's one of the things I tell people when we do start medication is if you or your child or loved one, they're so focused that they can't change focus. That might make a teacher happy, but that's wrong. We don't want to see that. If they lose personality or become zombie, that's too much medicine, and we need to back off, or the wrong medicine. And so typically we can adjust that now and find something that does work. And there should be, ideally, if medication is working correctly, you shouldn't feel any different. There shouldn't be any side effects. Now, the effect you want is a side effect, but that's the thing. We should see only good side effects, not bad ones. And so you have to address that. But if it's done correctly, the right dose with the right understanding and making sure there truly is ADHD there, because the medicines are addressing that chemical imbalance. If there's not a chemical imbalance and you add a medicine, you're going to create a chemical imbalance, and that is going to cause side effects. So you have to really, really kind of watch that. But in the past, Ritalin, Adderall, that everybody knows those names. They're still around. They're still used a lot. Unfortunately, insurance companies always say you have to use those first, and they're the ones that have the most side effects and are the ones that are abused. And so it doesn't make sense to me that they require you to use those. We have better choices now that have much less side effects and just work better. But medicine itself, we're used to thinking that medicine is a cure. There's no cure for ADHD. In this case, medication is a tool to assist, to open the door, to make people more aware that they're being distracted, more aware that they're being impulsive, so then they can make the decision to refocus, control it. It doesn't do anything, doesn't change their ability. And I always tell people that are doing bad in school, we start medicine, they're doing great. They get the credit for that. The medicine did not make them smarter, did not give them any gifts they did not already have, but enabled them to use them better, and to be more aware. But that decision still comes from that individual. And that's
I think you said something really, really powerful there when you said that it's them. They have the gifts, and the medicine simply help them be able to tap in to the gifts that they have. Because so often people with ADHD have heard nothing but negative, and it's always, bad things about them, or, and so the positive is
that's a problem with our society right now, is that the negative always gets brought up, and the positive just gets overlooked, so that's unfortunate. But and it may even be too that I mean, my wife often says to me all the time, "You're anti-medicine. Why are you a doctor?" Because you're because I won't even take Advil. I don't like to take medicine if I don't need it. Now I take my ADHD medicines now. I made it through college and med school without being treated. I didn't know I had ADHD. No one else did. And you can be successful without medicine, but you have to understand, if you have ADHD, you're going to have to work harder than other people that don't have ADHD. And it's essentially a handicap. You can overcome it. You can overcome anything, but it's hard. Medicine just makes that more doable, easier to do. And again, as I say, medicine's good as long as there are no side effects, or very few, or very mild side effects. And so you have to balance the positives and the negatives.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brugman, for speaking to these questions. I want to transition here because I know that the audience is very much engaged. I can see some questions coming through. So I want to step back myself in the interview so that you can answer some of our audience questions here. One of the ones I see says, are you able to comment on how ADHD and grief become entangled?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. And I remember a few years ago when some psychologists coined the term now I'm having just got a mental block there, but when people with ADHD get corrected, we have rejection sensitivity syndrome. And I was thinking that's not a new thing. That's everybody with ADHD has that. And part of that is because through life, we're corrected so many times over and over and over again because we're distracted or we do something wrong that we get extremely sensitive to that. Mm-hmm. And so any correction at all, my wife says, did you walk the dog yet? What I hear is, you forgot to walk the dog again, didn't you? And she's just asking me a question, but I react like you think that I forgot. And I'm like, yes, I did, rather than saying, yes, honey, or no, I'm about to, so it's a real thing, that gets built up, and it's something that we have to battle regardless. Emotion regulation is part of ADHD. And I relate that more to the impulsive side. Emotions are impulsive, by nature, and we don't regulate that real well. And so that's going to affect our relationships with people, with even our self-esteem, etc. Yeah. And it builds over time, and then you develop habits about that. So it is difficult. That's definitely a part there. Now, what I say is usually when we treat it correctly, it doesn't make that emotional dysregulation go away, but you're more aware of it. Mm-hmm. And so you can start to learn to control that better. Mm-hmm. I still have that tendency when anybody corrects me to overreact, mm-hmm. but sometimes I'm better able at catching that and then controlling my tone. But it's an ongoing process.
So I have another question that has come through, and that is, you talked about what is ADHD, and the participant or the attendee has asked, what are some of the other characteristics of ADHD?
Well, and I think I know where they're going with that is like very often girls often aren't diagnosed until later. Older women, particularly, sometimes not until after, because I like to say, us guys, if you don't like the way I am, that's your problem. Women don't do that. They try to fit in, and they hide it much better, and they don't get credit for it. But then, suddenly you become a mom, and now not only do you have to remember everything you need to remember, you have to remember everything everybody else needs to remember, and then suddenly it's just too much. So there's a delay, but that's because they're not impulsive. They're not jumping around the classroom. So the impulsive kids are a little bit easier to pick out. The ones that are mostly inattentive, not drawing attention to stuff. Now, again, there's why I think a lot of people with ADHD are very smart. And so you can half pay attention in school and still get good grades. But each year it gets harder and harder to do that. So sometimes it's not till sixth grade. In fifth grade, the teacher might say, hey, where's your homework? In sixth grade, they just put a 0 down. Mm-hmm. And mom made sure you did your homework. You were about to turn it in. You start talking to your friend, and in your head, you turned it in, but you never did. Well, now you get a 0. So it starts to build up. High school is very much harder than middle school. College, logarithmically harder. So it gets to that point where you can't just sort of fill in the blanks anymore on your own. And so that's why sometimes there's a delay there. So sometimes those people that are maybe doing good in school, their grades are good, but they're coming home saying they don't feel like they're doing good. They're stressed. They're because they know they're working harder than their peers to get those same grades. And then people just say, oh, well, that you're being silly, but they're really stressing out over it. So the other way, if you think of like 10 ducks, they're swimming across the pond. They all look like they're gliding equally across the water. That one duck that has ADHD, their feet are going 10 times faster than the other 9, but nobody sees it. But that duck is getting stressed over that. So sometimes the stress or the fact that I'm getting corrected, even though I'm performing good in grades, but I lose track of conversations. People think you don't care if you can't remember. My wife will say, well, you don't listen to me. Like, no, I listen. I don't remember what you said, but that's not on purpose either. Right. But it looks that way. It looks like you just don't care. So people that have they're not quite ADHD obvious,
Yeah.
but things like, I lose track of conversations. I never say the right thing at the right time. I'm working so much harder than everybody else, but I don't get any credit for it. And that's how I got through college. I realized that I have to read everything 10 times in order to remember it.
Mhm.
Well, if I have to read every page 10 times, it takes me 10 times longer to do
Right.
everything. And so
So
I always felt that I was the slowest and therefore the dumbest in the class, even though my performance was good. But I
yes.
didn't feel it.
Well, can you speak to assessments? We've got a couple of questions coming in regarding the assessments that are required in order for maybe someone to get medication or for a child to get accommodations in
Yeah.
school. Can you speak to that?
And that's a harder thing too, in the sense that even doctors aren't always educated on ADHD. And again, they might say, well, if you've got good grades, you can't have ADHD. Or, you know, that's a problem. Now, traditionally, the way we assess ADHD, there are 18 diagnostic criteria of ADHD. 9 of those criteria are focus issues. 9 of them are hyperimpulsive issues. And so the questionnaires like the Vanderbilt form, the adult rating scales, those rating scales always have those 18 questions. And we're looking at different settings, home, school, etc. Do you have enough of these signs that, if you have 5 of the 6 questions for inattentiveness, but the diagnostic criteria says you have to have 6, then a doctor might say, well, you don't have ADHD because you didn't have 6 of those things. But on a different day, you have 8 of them, because whoever's filling out that form, it's still a bit subjective. What are you thinking about when you answer that question? Are you thinking about your best day, your worst day? It changes depending on what you're thinking about and who's filling out the form. So to do it right, you have to get multiple assessments. We try to get, questionnaires from teachers, from parents, or from colleagues, from spouses, etc. But that you can't rely on just those questionnaires. You have to delve into that more deeply. There isn't a specific test for ADHD per se. Now, in my clinic, I do use a computerized test called the QB test, which was the first FDA-approved test that objectively measures those core symptoms. But then it's not a questionnaire. It's not a person's, answer that's subjective. But even that can be wrong. But at least it gives me more objective data compared to that person's age and gender. And what I like about the QB test, it also looks at compares those results to that person's age and gender, because ADHD changes over time. The questionnaires tend to put everybody in one big group, but boys and girls are different than adults.
Right.
A 14-year-old is different than a 6-year-old, and men are different than women. So you have to look at all of those things compared to that particular group. Traditionally, a lot of times an assessment might mean a full battery IQ achievement testing, school testing. That's testing for other things that could look like ADHD and not be. And it's still good to have it done because you have to rule out those things, but it's not ADHD testing per se.
So how does a parent go about getting that testing for a child who they are thinking may have ADHD?
Yeah, and if part of the thinking is there may be a true learning disability, or then that full battery IQ achievement testing is required to rule out those other things. If it's dyslexia, you got to do specific testing to rule that out. For most people, it's seeing either a psychologist, or a doctor that's going to do those questionnaires. At least that's the basic start. You have to get that done, and then go further. Then the next question is, if there's enough of those positives that say this meets criteria for ADHD, the next question is, well, does it negatively impact your life in more than one setting? Because you can have ADHD and still do well in life. but people get hung up on it's just about grades. So again, that really intelligent person is getting good grades, but they're not doing good socially. They're not doing good at home. And those are just as important areas as school.
Right.
And so you have to delve into all of those areas. So I think that a lot of times a psychologist might be better, take more time to delve into that than a busy pediatrician. Unfortunately, they have 15 minutes and they're not going to go into that in depth. So I do think it's important sometimes to find a provider that specializes in ADHD that is going to take that extra time to really ask those questions and find out all those answers. Now, I'm suddenly, I don't see you anymore. I'm wondering did I lose you?
Yes, it does look like you lost her, so I'm going to pick up one of the other questions there. We have questions in the chat from Brian Adams. Can you explain how medication has helped you and changed the way you focus?
Yes. And the way like most of the medicines for ADHD are stimulants. There are non-stimulant medicines that work too, but the stimulants tend to work better for more people. But the definition of a stimulant means it stimulates dopamine release in the brain. That specifically is the problem with those of us with ADHD. Not enough dopamine in the prefrontal cortex, the executive area. Stimulants stimulate that dopamine release in that part of the brain. If that medicine only stimulates dopamine in that prefrontal cortex, there won't be side effects. There'll just be better focus, better impulse control. But nothing is perfect. The side effects come from stimulating dopamine in other areas. So if everybody gets appetite decrease because it stimulates the appetite center. The way I think of it is ADHD is that pilot light turns off. A stimulant stimulates that pilot light. Now, while the medicine's on board, all that energy that a person with ADHD has to do to keep the pilot light on, I'm doing great. So then they relax. As soon as they relax, their pilot light goes out. I'm not doing great now anymore. I'm doing good again. And I relax. Then they're not doing good. Well, what the medicine does, it keeps that pilot light on for you. So all that energy that you have to use to keep that focus, to keep that impulse control, now you can take that same energy and use it to ignore the squirrel, to remember what the teacher asked you to do, to catch and maybe correct that impulse. What it doesn't do, it doesn't make the individual want to. So they could be on medicine and they could think before they act, oh, I shouldn't hit my sister, but you know what? She deserves it. I'm going to do it anyway. They can focus and do their homework, but they can still decide they don't like their homework and they're not going to do it. They can pay attention to the teacher, but they might find that the squirrel is more interesting and decide to focus on the squirrel. So there's no magic medicine, and that's what sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes people are looking for that and there isn't, it just opens a door. But that's sort of the balance that you get. You want them, if there's truly ADHD, the right medicine can open that door, but we still need the individual to walk through it. They decide. And sometimes if they haven't learned how to walk through that door, that's where the best outcome isn't just medicine. It's usually medicine and some coaching, some counseling, because the medicines don't teach you anything. You have to learn those things. And then so having an executive coach or an ADHD coach or a therapist, that's usually the best outcome is when you have that combination.
Thank you for that, Dr. Brugman. And my apologies. I had some technical difficulties, but as Linda said, just come right back on. So here I am. And I see we have a couple more questions in our Q&A. Linda, how are we doing on time?
We have, we're good for time, so you can go ahead and ask a couple of more questions there.
Okay. I see another question here about children or adults and who are seeking jobs. Are they required to inform their employer that they have been diagnosed with ADHD? And I know that one can be sticky. So if you could.
It can be sticky. And I would say they're not required to tell anybody. But if, say, you are being treated for ADHD with the stimulant medicine, and then your particular job does urine checks and does drug testing. Well, some of those medicines, like anything that's based on Adderall, is going to come up as amphetamine, in your urine. And then what an employer is going to think right away is you're doing cocaine, which isn't the case. They're completely different, but it still shows up the same on the test. So if in those situations, if you've got a job that does urine testing, then you need to disclose that you're on medication for it. The only other reason why you would potentially want to bring it up would be is if ADHD is like, if having ADHD enables your job to allow some accommodations, that would be helpful in that situation. Now no employer is obligated to do that, but I would say if I'm distracted by noise, I would like to not have my desk be next to the water cooler or the fax machine, or the where there's a lot of noise, so could that be a possibility? Yes. But what you can't expect is that, well, I'm going to tell my employer I have ADHD, so they have to excuse me because I'm late all the time. And that's true. Those of us with ADHD, we do not measure time correctly at all. So I've been thinking we've been talking for 5 minutes, and it's been longer than that already. But you get up for work, you get ready for work, you go, oh, I got half an hour to get ready. And then you look at your phone, and 45 minutes later, you realize you're late for work. Oh, I have ADHD. Your employer doesn't care. So yes, people with ADHD are often late because we lose time, but then you have to develop coping mechanisms like setting alarms, making sure you give yourself enough time. Don't look at that phone, when you have a task to do. But could that mean that you get a little bit more understanding where, a lot of times I like to tell people, like if I say something off the cuff, I shouldn't have said that. Well, again, you might say, okay, I have ADHD, please excuse me. But what it doesn't do is give you permission then to say whatever you want.
Right. That's a good point. I have another question that has come in, and it's a very thoughtful and empathetic question. How best can family and friends support individuals who live with ADHD?
Yeah, that's, and that's a good point. It's hard for those of us with ADHD, on a daily basis, but it's also really hard for the people that live with us. Now, whether they have ADHD or not, I usually say, gosh, in a busy family, it's nice if at least somebody doesn't have ADHD because they have to keep the rest of us on track. But it's hard. Understanding. Now, I'm not sure exactly where they're going with that question, but there needs to be some understanding and empathy in both directions. That it is hard to live with ADHD and to have it, but that's not to mean that there's not things that you can do. I would say that at 10 o'clock at night, when my wife asked me a question and I have a bad tone, she often will give me the grace to say, okay, I know you have ADHD, your medicine's worn off. Did you mean it that way? And that gives me the chance to say, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Rather than her just reacting to me immediately and blah, blah, blah. But if I don't put effort into trying to control that, nobody's going to put up with that forever.
Right.
You don't get a bye because you have ADHD, but you do have to understand that I will forget to do things. Now, so you could go, well, you know what? I'm just tired of you always forgetting things. Goodbye, I'm out of here. Versus, okay, why don't you remind me? But I can't depend on someone else to remind me. Now here's the funny thing is that it works both ways. I don't like to be reminded because that reminds me I have ADHD and I forget things. So I react badly when people remind me, but I also know I need to be reminded. So I might get mad at my support person for reminding me, and then I also get mad at them for not reminding me. So it's a double, they get negative either way. So those of us with ADHD have to realize that, okay, we have to not overreact when we get reminded, but also accept that we need it. But
Yes.
the people around us have to realize that we have to try to do it in a way that doesn't look like nagging or pointing out that you're deficient. So now again, the driving thing, my wife will go, instead of saying turn right here, she just points, and then I can see in the corner of my eye, and then she lets me take credit, like, okay, I knew I was supposed to turn here. So or when I get excited, I get louder and louder, and I don't even realize my volume's getting higher. And if she says, "Yeah, you're too loud," that totally disrupts my whole train of thought. And now I got to start over. So she'll just put her hand up, and that gives me a cue to go, and I can calm my voice down a little bit without having to start my whole thought process all over again. Because
But
that
those are
is one
some
of the
good tactics. We appreciate that. And I
yeah.
see that we're right at time now. So
Yes.
I'm going to ask one thing of you, Dr. Brugman, because there are a couple of questions still in the Q&A that we weren't able to get to. If we send them to you offline, can you provide us with answers? And when we send the information out to everyone post the call, we could have those questions answered as well.
Yeah, I absolutely could do that. And it gets hard in a time format like this because, again, like I'll ramble on. 'Cause
Well, we
people,
appreciate the
we're not
knowledge.
aware of time passage.
Yes.
Definitely. Linda, we turn it back to you.
Okay, this has been an excellent presentation, Dr. Brugman. I already know that we will need to do a continuation in this series here. And thank you for supplying us so much great information. And Gilda, you and Bank of America for taking part in this initiative. And at this time here, we want to thank everyone for attendance. And as you know, you heard from Gerald Johnson, our president of the Charlotte Post Foundation. And to continue programs like this, we cannot do this alone. We need your help. And I want to say we need your support. And so you say, oh, there's a telephone. Telephone, many of you may not even recall this type of
But nobody
telephone.
knows what that is.
We need your support. But I know you know one of these. So I'm going to ask you to take out your phone because we all have familiar with this type of telephone here. And we have the Charlotte Post Foundation. And this is how you can support us. We have 3 ways, and I'm going to share with you. The first way is text to give. Text to give. And you'll put in a code 41444. 41444. We all know how to text. And the message is PB24. PB24. And your name. We like to have your name. And any amount, no amount is too small. This is how you can support us. So for those of you all, know everyone has a cell phone. I want you to take a snapshot. Take a snapshot of how you can support the Charlotte Post Foundation so we can continue this conversation and bring Dr. Brugman back here. Text to give 41444, message PB24, your name, and any amount. We'll appreciate that. Let's go ahead and take your phone and snapshot. And I said that was one of the ways that you can help support the Charlotte Post Foundation. You can go online by visiting our website, cpfdonate.org, cpdonate.org. And we do continue the snail mail. Mail it to the Charlotte Post Foundation, 5118 Princess Street in Charlotte, North Carolina, 28269. Let's go ahead, take that phone and take a snapshot. There's other ways you can support us. We all in the social media platforms here, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Follow us on Facebook, Charlotte Post Foundation. Yes, we do have Instagram as well. Post FDN, LinkedIn, the Charlotte Post Foundation. And so we want to say thank you for attending our webinar and this evening in understanding ADHD.
Linda,
Thank
if I
you.
could add one more thing to
Okay.
this before we close, and that
Mhm.
is I did see a couple of questions where folks were asking about how to get tested or those sorts of things. And I just wanted to mention that Dr. Brugman at Brugman Attention Associates, they may want to reach out to him as well for additional guidance on how what someone could be tested and further the dialogue for them and their family personally. So I just wanted to make mention of that.
Thank you.